A gym star, black belt, dared the quiet janitor to throw one punch, and 24 hours later, nobody in that building was laughing. What he chose to do in the last 3 seconds is the part that went around the world. Stay with me to the end. And if you believe real strength is measured by what a person refuses to do, subscribe before we start. One punch, that's all it takes. Dare you. Brooke Sinclair's voice carried across Titan Fight Academy, cutting through the rhythm of the heavy bags. The gym's star black belt turned toward the man mopping the floor at the back of the room, her eyes moving from the faded gray coveralls down to the mop in his hands, then away again, the way a person looks at something left too long in a corner. The class laughed. Walter Grady, 43 years old, raising a daughter alone, set the mop down without a word. Not one person in that room understood what had just been set in motion. 24 hours later, nobody in it was laughing. Titan Fight Academy sat in a low brick building off a service road in Austin, and Walter Grady knew it the way few people ever would, empty after 9, with the overhead lights half killed and the heavy bags hanging still. That was when he worked. He moved through the place on a route he never varied. The mats first, then the mirrors, then the locker room, then the long strip of floor by the front windows where the day had left its scuffs. He wrung the mop out, laid a clean arc of water across the rubber, and let it dry while he moved to the next thing. He'd reset the same bag chains 100 times. He'd fixed a locker latch 3 weeks running that no one had ever thought to report. The members knew his face the way people know a fixture. When they passed him on their way out, phones already in their hands, most of them looked through him, and that suited him fine. A man could disappear inside a pair of gray coveralls and a mop, and disappearing was more or less the point. He'd come to the gym through a program. Dal Ruiz ran out of the back office, a standing offer to hire veterans nobody else would look at twice. Dale hadn't asked many questions. Walter had been grateful for that, and for the quiet, and for the paycheck that kept the lights on in a small apartment across town. In the far corner, under the only bank of lights he left, burning full, his daughter sat cross-legged on a folded mat with a workbook open on her knee. Maya was 12, and she came with the job. Homework in the evenings, home when he locked up. Now and then she looked up to watch a fighter finish on the bags, and something moved behind her eyes that Walter noticed and never mentioned. He finished the front strip, straightened, and rolled one shoulder until it gave a soft click. His body carried a catalog of small aches that belonged to another life, and most nights he could keep that life where it belonged, behind him in the dark, out past the reach of the mop. A few hours before any of that, before the doors were locked and the lights came down, the mats had belonged to Brooke Sinclair. She was the best thing Titan had, and everyone in the building knew it, herself included. A black belt with a shelf of regional trophies and a kickboxing record that had once meant something on the amateur circuit. She ran the evening class at full capacity week after week. In the ways that could be measured, she was an excellent teacher. She could catch a flaw in a student's hip from across the room and fix it in a sentence. People signed up because of her. People stayed because of her. When she demonstrated, the room went quiet on its own. She'd throw a spinning back kick that landed light as a tap on the pad. Student held, and the whole class would exhale at once, half of them wishing they could move like that, all of them a little afraid of her. That fear was part of the draw. She'd learned a long time ago that people would forgive almost anything in someone they wanted to become. She also had a gift for making other people small, and she used it the way some instructors use a whistle. That evening, she walked the class through a combination, and on her way down the line, she stepped across the strip of floor Walter had finished minutes before. She turned and smiled at the 20 of them behind her. "Go ahead," she said, nodding at the fresh streaks. "Walk on it. That's what he gets paid for." They laughed because she was laughing, and they walked across it. Walter came back through with the mop and took the floor again, without a word, the way water closes over a stone. There was something under the performance that none of them looked closely enough to see. A tightness at the edges of it, a woman keeping her footing on ground that had started lately to tilt. But that was hers, and she hit it well, and for now it only came out sideways as something sharp aimed at whoever was nearest and least able to answer. The apartment was small and clean, and the first thing anyone saw through the door was Ellen. Her photograph stood on the low shelf by the window where the evening light found it. A woman caught mid-laugh. 2 years gone now, though there were still nights. Walter set 2 mugs on the counter out of habit before he caught himself. Maya had her mother's chin and her mother's stubbornness, and lately her mother's way of watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. She dropped her bag and planted herself in the middle of the living room floor. "Watch, I've been working on it." Her belt test was a few weeks out and she'd drilled the same form for a month. She ran it now, and Walter stood in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel in his hands and watched his daughter throw a cross that landed a half-inch short of everything it should have been. Her weight sat back on her heels. She was punching with her arm instead of the floor. His hand came up on its own 2 fingers, reaching to turn her hip the 1/4 inch that would have changed all of it. Then he stopped and drew the hand back to the towel and folded it there, the way a man pulls back from a stove he's forgotten is hot. "Looks good," he told her. "Reset your feet a little. You'll get it." Maya dropped her guard, breathing hard, pleased, then reaching for her water offhand. "Some kid asked me today what you do at the gym." Walter kept his eyes on the towel. "What did you tell him?" "Equipment maintenance." She shrugged, not quite looking at him either. "It's basically true." He nodded and let it stay true, and said nothing about the small thing that turned over in his chest. Later, when the apartment had gone quiet and Maya's light was off, he stood a while by the shelf. There had been a promise once made in a room that smelled of antiseptic to a woman who could no longer hold his hand but had reached for it anyway. He didn't take it out and look at it often. He didn't need to. It lived in the space between his fingers in a closed fist, and he'd kept it there whole for 2 years, and he meant to keep it there the rest of his life. The next evening, the gym emptied the way it always did, and by 9:30 it was the 2 of them again. Maya didn't reach for her workbook. She drifted onto the mats instead, and in front of the long mirror she started running her form. The same cross, the same heels, the same half-inch of nothing. She didn't know he was watching. She threw it again and again, chasing something she couldn't feel, and every time her balance tipped a fraction forward and robbed the punch of all it was meant to carry. Walter watched her miss it 4 times. On the 5th, he set the mop against the wall. He crossed the mat and stood beside her, and he didn't touch her. He only spoke low, and even 3 things in a row. "Weight in the back foot. Turn the hip, not the shoulder. Let the floor do it." Maya reset. She turned the hip. She let the floor do it. The cross that came out of her was a different animal. Short, clean, a hard little crack that snapped the air and rocked her back onto a balanced stance, and her eyes went wide with the shock of having done it right. She stared at her own fist as though it belonged to someone else. Then she laughed, bright and delighted, and looked up at her father. And Walter, before he could think better of it, laughed too, the sound rusty from disuse, the pair of them grinning at a punch in an empty gym. Neither of them saw Brooke in the doorway. She'd come back for a bag she'd left in the office, and she stood at the edge of the light with the strap in her hand and watched all of it. The correction, the change in the girl, the 2 of them laughing. Her face gave away nothing. She said not a word. She turned and walked out into the lot, and the glass door swung shut behind her, and something had shifted that neither Walter nor his daughter could feel yet. The following night was the busiest of the week, and the mats were full when Walter came in to start the back of the room. He'd barely lifted the mop when Brooke's voice cut across the floor. "Maya." She said it warmly, an instructor calling a student forward, and 30 people turned to watch a 12-year-old go still. "Come here. Show everyone what your dad's been teaching you." Maya's face drained white. She hadn't asked for this, and she couldn't refuse it, not with the whole class watching, and she walked to the center of the mat on legs that had quit working right. She set her feet wrong. She threw the cross, and every correction her father had given her the night before deserted her at once, and it came out short and soft and heels back, and it was worse for how hard she was trying. The class laughed. It wasn't cruel, exactly. It was only 30 people laughing at a child, which was enough. Brooke let it run a moment before she turned to the back of the room, to the man standing very still with a mop in his hands. "What do you know about fighting?" she asked, and the room quieted to hear it. "You want her ending up like you holding a mop the rest of her life." Walter looked at his daughter's face, at what was written there, and he set the mop against the wall. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise anything. Whatever went through him stayed under the surface, and he only looked at Brooke the way a man looks at weather coming in. She read the stillness as fear, and she smiled, and she handed the whole room the line she'd post online within the hour. "1 punch," she said. "That's all it takes. Dare you." The room waited for him to walk away. Instead, Walter asked a question quiet enough that the front row leaned in for it. "What time?" Something crossed Brooke's face there and gone too fast to name before the smile slid back over it. "Tomorrow," she said loud now for everyone. 7 o'clock. She said it to the room as much as to him, and the room ate it up. Near the door, a phone was already up and recording. Walter picked the mop back up and finished the strip of floor by the windows, and did not look at the crowd again. It was Maya who found him afterward by the supply closet, and her face wasn't laughing anymore. It had gone to something nearer fear. "Dad," she said very low so no one else could hear. "What did you just do?" He didn't have an answer she would understand. He wasn't certain he had one for himself. He set a hand on the back of her head the way he used to when she was small, and gave her the only true thing he had. "It's going to be all right." He didn't yet know whether that was a promise he could keep. That night, once the last student had gone and the lot had emptied, Brooke sat in her car under the single working light and did the thing that would carry all of it out of the building and into the world. The clip was already cut. 10 seconds of a man in gray coveralls setting down a mop, her own voice riding over it, bright and sure of itself. She typed 4 words beneath the video. "One punch, dare you." Then she posted it and drove home without another thought. By morning, it had tens of thousands of views. By the time the sun was well up, the comments had taken on a life of their own, people who'd never set foot in Austin arguing about a janitor and a black belt tagging friends promising to drive in for it. Somewhere in the night, the thing had stopped being a private cruelty and become an event. By that afternoon, they started arriving. Strangers Walter had never seen wandered through the front doors with phones already half raised, asking the desk what time the fight was, whether it was really happening where they should stand. A few had come from gyms across town. A man in a tank top asked a 15-year-old at the counter to confirm the 7 o'clock thing, and the kid, delighted to be part of something, confirmed it. Walter came in for his shift and felt the room's attention find him the moment he crossed the threshold. It was a new sensation and not a welcome one. He'd spent 2 years being invisible on purpose, and now a stranger by the water fountain lifted a phone and filmed him carrying a bucket, and there was nothing he could do about it but keep walking. Dale Ruiz caught him before he reached the supply closet and tipped his head toward the office. The door closed. For a moment, the older man only stood behind his desk with both hands flat on it, looking at a thing he didn't want to look at. Dale had run this place a long time, and he'd learned to keep his troubles off his face, but he couldn't keep them off it now. "You know I can't let her fight you," Dale said at last. "And you know I can't fire her either. She brings in more paying members than anyone else on that schedule, close to half. I let her go half, this room follows her out the door, and there's no gym left to clean." "I know," Walter said. "So here's what I've got." Dale straightened, and it seemed to cost him something. "You walk away from this, you're a coward, on 30 phones, and your girl watches it happen. Or you step out on that mat tonight, and I have to let you go. Both of you know why. A janitor can't be brawling with an instructor in front of the members. The insurance alone would end me." He let that land. "And if you're gone, so is Maya's free spot. Her test's coming up. She loses that too." Walter said nothing because there was nothing in it that wasn't true. Dale came around the desk then and lowered his voice, though there was no one to hear. "I've seen your file, Walt. All of it. I'm the only one in this building who has." He held the other man's eyes. "That's exactly why I'm asking you not to. Not because I think you'll lose." Walter had not slept the night the challenge was made. Long after the class emptied and the lot went dark after Dale locked the front and left him with the keys. The way he did most nights, Walter had stayed on the mats alone. He hadn't planned to. He'd finished his route, put the mop up, and then found himself standing in the middle of the empty floor with the lights down, and his hands had started doing something on their own. There was a roll of athletic tape in the office drawer. He wrapped his knuckles the way his body still knew how the loops and the anchor between the fingers, 15 years since the last time, and not a motion wrong. He hadn't decided to do it. He watched his own hands finish the work like they belonged to a stranger who'd never made a promise to anyone. And then it came the way it always came when he was tired and off his guard. Not the war. People assumed it would be the war. It never was. It was a grocery store parking lot 6 months after he came home. A man had said something to Ellen by the cart return, had put a hand on her arm, and the thing that lived in Walter had come up out of the ground with no warning at all. He remembered almost none of it. He remembered the after. The man on the pavement, not moving right, and his own knuckles split, and the sound coming out of his own throat that he didn't recognize. And he remembered Ellen not screaming, not running, just watching him from inside the car with her hand pressed flat to the glass, and an expression he'd spent the rest of their marriage trying to erase from her face. She was the one who'd pulled him off. She was the one who told the paramedics it was self-defense, though they both knew what it had been. The hospital came later. The cancer, the long, slow narrowing of everything. Near the end, when her hands were too weak to hold anything, she'd reached for his across the blanket and made him fold his fingers inside hers. She only has you now. Ellen had told him, her voice by then almost nothing. Whatever is still in there, whatever came home with you, don't ever let her be afraid of you. Promise me that. Not once. Not ever. He'd promised. And in 2 years, he had not once let his hand become a fist, and he'd meant to carry that the rest of his life. Alone on the mats, Walter unwound the tape from his knuckles and dropped it in the trash and sat down on the edge of the floor in the dark for a long time and did not move. By the day of the fight, something in Maya had turned, and it was the turning that frightened him most. She'd been scared the night of the challenge, the fear of a child who suddenly understands the ground is not solid. But the clip had done its work overnight, and by the time she got home from school, her fear had curdled into something else. Her classmates had seen the video. To them, her father was no longer the man with the mop. He was about to be in a real fight against a real black belt, and that made her, for one strange day, a person worth talking to. She found him in the kitchen, and the words came out of her in a rush, and under the nerves was a bright, terrible eagerness he'd never heard from her before. Everybody's coming tonight. Marcus said his whole family's coming. Dad, are you actually going to fight her? And there it was, the thing that put ice down his spine. His daughter wanted to watch him fight. She didn't understand what she was asking to see. He set down the dish towel and looked at her a moment. And then he did something he'd never done. He told her a piece of the truth. A long time ago, he said carefully, before you can really remember, I hurt somebody badly in a parking lot. I don't even remember doing it. He watched her face change. Something happens to me sometimes, Maya, something I don't get to decide, and once it starts, I'm not sure I can stop it. She had never seen her father afraid of anything. She saw it now, and it silenced the eagerness in her completely. For a long moment, the 12-year-old just looked at him. Then, don't fight her, Maya said quietly. You don't have to hit her, just stand there. That's allowed, isn't it? You can just stand there and let her get tired. Walter looked at his daughter and felt something ease and tighten at the same time. Yeah, he said. That's allowed. An hour before 7, Brooke sat alone in the office with the door shut and the lights low, watching herself lose. On the laptop screen was tape of her last 2 fights, the ones nobody linked to anymore, the ones that had quietly ended her run on the circuit. She watched the younger version of herself get caught by a jab she should have seen, watched her legs stop being fast enough in the 3rd round, watched the referee step between her and a woman 5 years younger. She'd watched this footage more times than she would ever admit. Her phone lit up at the desk. She knew the number before she looked. The sponsor's rep was pleasant, as he always was, and said nothing directly, as he always did, and by the end of the call, she understood the same thing she'd understood for a month. They were looking at someone else now, someone younger. Her name was becoming a thing people used to know. She set the phone down and looked at it, and the frozen thumbnail of the viral clip stared back at her. 500,000 views now. Her voice, her face, the mop. It was the only thing keeping her afloat, and she knew it, and she hated that she knew it. There had been a coach once at the club where she came up a man she'd wanted to impress more than she'd ever wanted anything. In front of the whole floor one afternoon, he'd watched her spar and told her not unkindly that she was really only cut out to teach cardio to housewives. Everyone had heard it. She'd spent every year since building a version of herself that no one would ever say that to. And she'd learned somewhere along the way that the surest method was to make other people small before they got the chance to do it to her. She wasn't cruel whatever the room would decide about her tonight. She was drowning, and she'd grabbed the nearest thing that floated, and the nearest thing had been a quiet man with a mop who never fought back. At 7, the gym couldn't hold everyone who wanted in. They lined the mats 3 deep and stood on benches and clustered at the front doors that wouldn't close phones up in a field of small red lights. The heavy bags had been pushed to the walls. Someone had cleared the center of the floor without being asked, and the crowd had arranged itself around that empty square, the way crowds do around the place where something is about to happen. Maya was at the front edge of it. He'd told her to stay home, and she'd refused, and he'd had neither the heart nor the time to make her go. Dale stood at the edge with a clipboard and the waiver on it, and a face like a man attending a funeral he'd been forced to host. Both of them signed it in front of him. He didn't look at either one while they did. Brooke stood in the center in her fight gear, loose and bright, playing the crowd. And when she caught the noise cresting, she lifted her chin toward the man across from her. 30 seconds, she called out, and the room made it. That's all this takes, 30 seconds, and he goes back to his mop. Walter didn't answer. He reached up and unzipped the gray coveralls to the waist, pulled his arms free of the sleeves, and let the top hang. And the laughter in the room died in its throat. The scars were not the kind a surgeon leaves. Along one side of his torso ran the long, puckered seam of shrapnel. Across the ribs, the clean white line of a blade. High on the shoulder and low on the flank, two round marks, one bigger where it had left and smaller where it had gone in. The kind of mark anyone who's ever watched the news knows on sight. His body wasn't a gym body. It was a body that had been used hard for something else entirely, and it had the flat, unshowy density of a man who'd once carried other men across open ground. The room went silent all at once, the way a wave pulls back before it turns. Brooke felt the floor shift under the thing she thought she understood. Somewhere behind her eyes, a small voice told her to step back, to laugh it off, to find any way out of the square. Every instinct she'd ever trusted told her to stop. She was the only person in the building who wouldn't let herself listen to it. The fight began, and for the first 30 seconds, Walter did exactly what his daughter had asked of him. He stood there. He didn't throw anything. He moved. That was all. A small economy of motion that took his head an inch off the line of every strike she sent. Brooke came out fast and technical and beautiful to watch, the product of more than a decade of honest work. A jab cross that split the air where his jaw had been. A lead hook, a switch, a round kick to the body that he turned off his forearm without seeming to try. She wasn't holding back. Everything she had she was throwing, and none of it touched him. The crowd, which had come to watch a black belt and a janitor, began to feel the current turn under its feet. At first, they'd been laughing at her at the 30 seconds coming and going with nothing to show for it. But the longer Walter simply slipped and drifted and refused to lift a hand, the more the mood soured, and it soured strangely against him. A man who wouldn't fight back began to look to that crowd like a man who thought he was above fighting back, like he was humiliating her on purpose, letting her wear herself out, making a show of not deigning to strike. And half of them were her students. The jeering started somewhere in the back and spread. Do something. Quit dancing. You think you're better than her. A voice near the door told him to fight or get off the mat. Brooke heard all of it, and it went into her like fuel. Whatever performance had been in her strikes burned off, and what was left underneath was raw and furious and afraid. She stopped fighting to win the crowd and started fighting to hurt him. She feinted the kick, closed the distance he'd been giving her, and drove an elbow up on the inside where he didn't expect a woman her size to come. It caught him across the brow. The skin split. Blood came fast and hot into his left eye, and with it came the salt on his lip and the high, thin ringing in his ears and the white of the overhead light smearing sideways. And all at once, Walter Grady was not in the gym anymore. For 3 seconds, he was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere the tape in his head had kept ready for 15 years, and the same thing that had taken him in a grocery store parking lot took him now. His hand shot out with a speed no one in that room had seen from a human being, and it closed on Brooke's wrist as she reset, and it turned. Not a technique from any class she'd ever taught, an economy of violence that folded her arm at the joint and dropped her weight and stood her helpless in half a heartbeat. And she looked up into his face from 6 inches away, and for the first time in her life, she saw in another person's eyes something that had nothing to do with sport. It was flat and far away, and it was measuring her, and every trophy and every belt and every year she'd trained meant precisely nothing in front of it. The whole room felt it break over them. Somebody near the front screamed. Then a single voice cut through all of it, high and cracking and terrified from the edge of the mat. "Stop, Dad!" Walter heard her. Something enormous shuddered to a halt behind his eyes. His hand opened. He let go of Brooke's wrist as though it had burned him, and he took one step back and then another and a third until there was open floor between them. And he stood there with blood running down the side of his face and his chest heaving and his hands held out from his body open. Both of them drooping, staring at them as though they weren't his. For a moment, nothing in the room moved but the blood on Walter's face. Brooke stood where he'd left her at the center of the cleared floor, her wrist held against her body, though he'd done it no real harm. 30-some phones held her there, red lights steady, and every one of them had caught it. Not a knockout, not a submission she could ever explain away. Something far worse. He had taken her, and then he'd let her go as though she weren't worth the trouble of finishing. That was the thing she couldn't survive. She'd spent more than a decade making certain no one would ever look at her and find her wanting, and this man had looked at her from 6 inches away. Found her exactly that, and set her down like a chair he was finished moving. Somewhere under the noise of the crowd, a voice that sounded like her old coach's told her what she already knew, and the shame of it went through her white hot. She didn't think. She loaded her hips, dropped her weight onto her back leg, and threw the hardest roundhouse of her life. It was a beautiful thing, the whole of her turning into it. More than a decade of honest hip and shin and follow-through aimed at the side of his head with everything she had left and everything she was terrified of losing driving it forward. In a ring against anyone her own size, it would have ended the night. But Walter had read it 3 seconds before it came. He'd seen it gathering in her shoulder, in the small drop of her hip, in the flat, furious thing behind her eyes that told him what she meant to do before her body had committed to it. And this time he did not slip. This time, with the blood still in his eye, he stepped into it. He came inside the arc of the kick before it reached full speed, close enough that its power wrapped harmlessly around his back, and his arm folded over her shin and pinned it against his ribs. Her standing leg was all that held her, and he took that too. A short sweep, unhurried, almost gentle, and the floor came up to meet her, and she was down on the mat, flat and clean and entirely unhurt, staring up into the lights. And then the room saw his hand go back. They saw the fist draw to his shoulder, saw the whole weight of the man behind it, the scarred arm, the speed. They'd already watched close around her wrist, and every person crowded 3 deep around that floor understood in the same instant that it was coming down on her face and that there was nothing any of them could do. It came down, and it stopped, 3 inches above her, close enough that the wind of it moved the hair across her forehead. The fist hung there and did not fall. The whole room went so quiet that the hum of the air handlers filled it. Walter knelt over her with his knuckles a hand's width from her nose and his chest heaving, and slowly, deliberately, in front of 30 phones, he opened his fingers. The fist became a hand. He held it out to her palm, up in offer, and blood dripped from his brow onto the mat beside her head. And for a long moment, Brooke only looked at it. Then she took it, and he drew her to her feet as easily as he'd put her down. I didn't let it become a spectacle. He said what he had to say, low, almost meant for her alone, though the room had gone quiet enough to carry it anyway. Real strength isn't for making people small, Walter told her. You're a good coach, one of the best I've seen, but being good at this doesn't give you the right to look down on anybody. Then he let go of her hand and turned and walked to the wall where the mop was leaning and picked it up and went back to the strip of floor he hadn't finished, as though the last 10 minutes had belonged to somebody else. The video went everywhere. It went further than Brooke's clip ever had, but it didn't go the way she'd built it to go, because the thing that traveled wasn't the takedown. People barely mentioned the sweep or the wrist or the moment she went down. What they shared, what they slowed down and watched again, was the 3 inches. A man with every reason and every ability to finish it, kneeling over the person who'd humiliated him, opening his fist. The offered hand, the blood on the mat, the janitor picking his mop back up while a black belt stood there and watched him walk away. Somebody captioned it, "The strongest man in the room is the one who doesn't have to prove it." And that was the version that outran all the rest. Dale watched it come in over 2 days, and then he found Walter in the supply closet at the end of a shift and stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets. "I told you I'd have to let you go," Dale said, "if you fought her." Walter set down the bucket. "You did." "Yeah, well." The older man looked at the floor, then back up. "Nobody got hurt. You both signed the waiver and it held. And it turns out half the country watched you not fight her. Turns out I've got people calling to put their kids in classes because of it." Something eased in his face that had been tight since the night the challenge was thrown. "You're not going anywhere, Walt. Neither is Maya's spot. Test still on." A few days after that, Brooke came looking for him, and she didn't come the way anyone expected. She didn't find Walter first. She found the youth class mid-session, 20 kids on the mat, and Maya among them, and she waited at the edge until the instructor gave her the floor. Then she crouched down in front of a 12-year-old girl, in front of every one of that child's classmates, the same audience she'd turned against her only days before. "Maya," Brooke said, and it was not the voice the gym knew. "What I did to you that night, putting you up there, letting them laugh at you, that was the worst thing I've ever done in this building. You didn't deserve any of it." I'm sorry. She held the girl's eyes. Your dad is a better teacher than I am. I'd be lucky if you kept training here. Only after that did she go and find Walter, who'd watched the whole thing from the back with a mop gun still in his hands. She stopped in front of him, and whatever pride had run her for so long was gone from her face. She asked him one question, and it was the question of a person who'd finally found something worth learning. How did you stop? Brooke said low. You had me. I saw your face. You were gone. How do you pull yourself back from that? Walter looked at her a moment, and then he told her the truth. I heard my daughter's voice, he said. That's all it's ever been, somebody worth stopping for. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, the gym filled up again, this time for the belt tests, folding chairs along one wall and parents holding up phones for a gentler reason. Brooke sat at the judges' table. She'd earned the seat honestly, and she took it seriously, and when the young ones came up one at a time, she scored them with a care the old Brooke would never have bothered to fake. Maya was near the end of the line. She set her feet, and this time they held, and the form her father had fixed in an empty gym came out of her clean and balanced the cross. Snapping the air, the way it had that first night, the two of them had laughed about it. When she finished breathing hard, she didn't look at the floor. She looked to the back of the room, past all the folding chairs, to the man standing there in gray coveralls, with a broom in one hand, her father the janitor, and she didn't care who saw her find him. And before the scores were read, Brooke stood up from the judges' table. In front of the whole room, in front of the parents and the phones and the kids, she turned toward the back where Walter stood, and she bowed to him, a full, deliberate bow, held a beat longer than the form required. Walter inclined his head in return, the broom still in his hand. Dale caught him by the door afterward when the room had emptied. He didn't make a speech of it. He offered Walter a place on the staff. Not for fighting, he said, but for the other thing, the discipline and the steadiness, the part the young ones needed most, and that no one else on that schedule could teach. Walter thought about it, and then he took it. But he kept the evening shift too. He didn't explain why, and Dale didn't ask. And so at 9:30 that night, when the last of them had gone and the lot had emptied and the lights came down, to half a man in gray coveralls moved through Titan Fight Academy on a route he never varied. The mats first, then the mirrors, then the long strip of floor by the front windows where the day had left its marks. A person's worth was never in the title on the door or the clothes on his back. It was in what he was strong enough to do and chose not to. And the man most of that room had walked past without a second glance had turned out in the end to be the one most worth looking at. If that landed with you, tell me in the comments about the strongest person you know who never had to prove it. And if you want more stories about quiet fathers the world underestimates, subscribe. There's another one waiting.